If someone had told me 30 years ago that at 65 I would wake up in an empty house filled with an uneasy silence, I would have laughed in their face. But life has a way of turning out completely differently than we plan. Sarah died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Quick and ruthless. With her gone, our house in Pulaski is no longer a place where I can find peace. Every morning I perform the same ritual. I wake up at 6, make a cup of strong tea. Coffee upsets my stomach now. Read the newspaper, and try not to look at the empty chair across from me. Sometimes I forget and automatically pour 2 cups. Pulaski is a small town where everyone knows everyone else. It used to feel cozy. Now it feels like a cage. 30 years of teaching economics at the local college have turned me into a public figure. Former students greet me on the street and ask how I'm doing, but no one comes in just to sit and chat in the evening. Professor Woodhouse, how are you? Elvira Patton, the grocer, whom I once gave an A for her term paper, approached me at the grocery store. Not bad, Elvira. I'm hanging in there, I replied with the standard answer that requires no further conversation. I saw your son and his wife last week. They came into town to do some shopping. She paused. They're a beautiful couple. I nodded. Daryl and Heather, my only son and his wife. They live half an hour away from me, but sometimes it feels like there's an ocean between us. I first felt this disconnect 6 years ago at their wedding. Heather insisted on having the ceremony at her parents' country club, Byron and Lorraine Hicks. Sarah was still alive then, but already weak. We sat at a table in the back, even though I had paid for half of the celebration. The bride's parents made toast after toast, but we weren't given a chance to speak. Later, Daryl apologized, saying it was just a misunderstanding with the evening's schedule. Sarah and I spent the first Christmas after their wedding alone. The newlyweds decided to celebrate with Heather's parents at a ski resort. Daryl called on December 23rd. Dad, I'm sorry it turned out this way. Heather's parents had already booked everything, and we couldn't cancel. There was sincere regret in his voice, but not enough to change anything. After Sarah's death, Daryl began to visit more often, usually on Sundays. At first, he came alone. We talked, sometimes watched baseball, ordered pizza. These visits were like a breath of fresh air in the stuffy room of my loneliness. Then Heather began to insist on joint visits. At first I was happy. I thought we would grow closer, but her true motives quickly became apparent. Andrew, she always called me by my first name, never Dad or even Mr. Woodhouse. This house is too big for one person. You must have a hard time keeping up with the cleaning. The house that Sarah and I bought 35 years ago was our pride and joy. Victorian style, 4 bedrooms, a large garden. We dreamed of filling it with children and grandchildren. Fate decided otherwise. Daryl remained our only child, and I still have no grandchildren. I hire a cleaner once a week, Heather. But thank you for your concern, I replied at the time. You know, she persisted, Daryl and I were discussing, maybe you should think about moving into a nursing home. There's a wonderful place in Roanoke with round-the-clock medical care. I looked at my son. He was studying his shoes, avoiding my gaze. I'm 62, not 92, I replied calmly, and I'm still capable of making my own decisions about my life. After that, their visits became less frequent. I realized that Heather was interested in my house, not my well-being. Heather's parents, Byron and Lorraine, were much like their daughter. Once, they came with Daryl and Heather for Thanksgiving. Byron, a retired stockbroker with a whiskey-red face, immediately began walking around the house, appraising the furniture and uttering phrases like, "Nice stuff, antiques. You can get good money for that these days." At dinner, Lorraine asked about my financial affairs. At your age, Andrew, it's important to have a clear plan for transferring your assets, she said in the tone of a doctor delivering an incurable diagnosis. Byron and I have already transferred everything to Heather. It saves on unnecessary taxes. Thanks for the advice, I said, cutting a slice of turkey, but my finances are in perfect order. The truth was that after 30 years of teaching and successful investments that Sarah and I had made together, I could afford a comfortable life and not worry about the future. My professor's pension, dividends, and savings gave me a freedom that my son's family seemed to view as a resource waiting to be tapped. Last winter, something happened that made me rethink our relationship. Daryl called to ask to borrow $20,000 for a down payment on a new car. Heather has her eye on a new Lexus, he explained. Her parents promised to help, but they're having some temporary liquidity issues. Why don't you take out a bank loan? I asked. Dad, you know what interest rates are like these days. I agreed to help, but insisted on a formal loan agreement with a repayment schedule. When Daryl came to pick up the check, Heather stayed in the car, even though it was a warm day. Doesn't she want to come in? I asked. She has a migraine, Daryl said, looking embarrassed. A few days later, I ran into them at the mall. Heather looked perfectly healthy, laughing and carrying bags from expensive boutiques. They didn't notice me, and I didn't call out to them. The most painful thing was that Daryl never took my side. In every argument, in every situation, he supported his wife. I understood his desire to keep the peace in the family, but at times I felt that I had lost my son long before he left home. After Sarah's death, loneliness became my constant companion. I tried to fill the void. I taught an economics course for adults at a community center, joined a book club, and even started learning Spanish. But in the evenings, the emptiness of the house would come crashing down on me with renewed force. One day, while looking through old photo albums, I came across pictures of Sarah and me on a Mediterranean cruise, our last big trip together. In the photos, we were smiling, holding hands against the backdrop of Greek islands and Italian ports. Sarah looked so alive, so happy. This discovery gave me an idea. Maybe traveling together would help mend my relationship with my son's family. Perhaps, away from our everyday worries, in a relaxing atmosphere, we could become closer again. I researched the options and chose a 2-week Caribbean cruise. A luxury liner, spacious cabins, lots of entertainment. Such a trip should appeal to everyone. The young couple and Heather's parents, whom I decided to include in the trip as well, hoping for reconciliation. The cost of the cruise for 5 people was considerable, but I could afford it. After all, what else could I spend my money on at my age? I couldn't take it with me to the grave. I called Daryl and invited him to lunch. Just him, without Heather. We met at a small Italian restaurant where we used to dine often when he was still a student. It's been a long time since we sat like this, I remarked when they brought us our pasta. Yes, Dad, I'm sorry. Work, home, you know. He looked genuinely guilty. I understand, I nodded. I have a proposal. I want to invite you and Heather on a cruise. A 2-week trip to the Caribbean. And Heather's parents, too. His eyes widened. Seriously? All of us? All of us? I've already looked into the options. A great ship, cabins with balconies. In July, when you and Heather are on vacation. That's very generous, Dad. He put down his fork. But are you sure? It's expensive, I'm sure. I need a little break, and I'd like to do it with my family. Daryl looked touched. Thank you. I'm sure Heather will be thrilled. And her parents, too. Just one request, I said. Let's make it our surprise. I want to pay for everything myself and give you the tickets. He agreed. And we finished lunch in a pleasant atmosphere that we hadn't had in a long time. As we said goodbye, Daryl gave me a big hug, and in that hug, I felt that maybe all was not lost. The next day, I booked the cruise and paid for all 5 seats. I chose the best cabins with ocean views, included full board and all excursions. It was a generous gesture that I hoped would show my family that I valued them and wanted to be part of their lives. When I returned home with the printed tickets and cruise brochures, I was overcome with a feeling of anticipation that I hadn't felt in a very long time. Maybe this trip would be the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. Maybe it would help heal old wounds and create new, happy memories. I laid the tickets on the table and imagined handing them out to everyone at a festive dinner. It would be my gift, my chance to feel like I had a family again. Sitting in the silence of my big empty house, I allowed myself to believe that everything could change for the better, that the loneliness that had become my constant companion would finally recede. If only I had known how naive those hopes were and what turn events would take. But at that moment, the future seemed full of possibilities, and the cruise tickets lay on the table like a promise of better days. A week passed after our lunch with Daryl before I received a call from him. Usually that meant Heather had approved our plans. My son never had the determination to act without her consent. Dad, this is an amazing idea. His voice sounded unnaturally enthusiastic. Heather is thrilled, and so are her parents. We are all very grateful. Something in his tone made me wary. Too much enthusiasm, too little sincerity. I'm glad you like it, I replied. Let's get together this weekend. I'll make dinner and show you all the details of the trip. There was a pause. Um, we can't this weekend. It's Heather's parents' wedding anniversary, and we're going to visit them. Maybe next week, I agreed, suppressing my disappointment. A week later, they couldn't make it either. Heather had some important meeting with a client. Real estate brokers, as she liked to say, don't have weekends. In the end, I went to their house myself with a folder containing beautifully designed invitations and all the information about the cruise. Their house, a modern two-story mansion in the suburbs, always seemed faceless to me, like a picture from a catalog, lacking individuality and warmth. Heather opened the door with a broad smile that didn't reach her eyes. Andrew, what a surprise. She kissed the air next to my cheek. Come in, we're just having lunch. Daryl and Heather's parents were sitting at the table. Lorraine, as always, was dressed as if she were going to a social event rather than a family dinner. Byron barely looked up from his plate to nod at me. Sorry to intrude, I said, sitting down in the chair offered to me. I brought some information about our cruise. I opened the folder and began showing them the itinerary, photos of the ship, and descriptions of the cabins and excursions. They looked at the materials with growing interest. Those are presidential suites, Heather exclaimed as she looked at the photos of the cabins. They must cost a fortune. I wanted the trip to be special, I replied simply. And all of this is paid for? Byron asked, showing interest for the first time. Completely. Tickets, transfers, excursions, even tips for the staff. That's incredibly generous, Andrew, Lorraine said in a tone that hinted at a question about my mental health. It's not often we get the chance to spend time together as a family. I tried to sound casual. When will you give us the tickets? Heather asked, changing the subject too quickly. They're at home in the safe. I'll give them to you closer to departure, I replied. The cruise is still 2 months away. A strange expression flashed across her face, a mixture of disappointment and calculation. Can't we get them earlier? She insisted. I'd like to study all the details, maybe order some additional services. All the information is in these brochures, I pointed to the materials spread out on the table. And if you want to add anything, we can do it together. The rest of the visit was spent talking about the upcoming trip. Heather and her parents discussed outfits for the captain's dinner, while Daryl was interested in the sports activities on board. No one asked me what I would like to do during the cruise. I was just a source of funding, not a participant in their plans. As I was leaving, I noticed Heather whisper something quickly to Daryl, and he nodded, looking in my direction. This reinforced my feeling that something was wrong. In the weeks that followed, their behavior became increasingly strange. Heather started calling me about various minor issues related to the trip. Andrew, I wanted to clarify which restaurants are included in our package. Andrew, which cabin will you be sailing in? Andrew, have you decided which excursions we will be booking? Every conversation invariably came back to the question of where the tickets were kept and when I would give them to her. I joked that all the documents were in a safe place and that we would fill out the boarding passes together a week before departure. One evening, Daryl called. Dad, could you come by tomorrow? We need to discuss something about the trip. Sure, I agreed. What time? After lunch, around 3? And, Dad, bring the cruise documents with you, okay? Heather wants to check something. Something in his voice made me wary. Check what exactly? Just some details about the excursions. She just wants to make sure we don't miss anything. I promised to come, but decided not to take the documents. Instead, I made copies of some pages, excluding reservation numbers and other important information. The next day, as I pulled up to my son's house, I saw Heather's parents' car in the driveway. This seemed strange. Daryl hadn't mentioned that they would be there too. I parked and didn't rush to get out. Something told me to be cautious. The living room window was slightly open, and voices could be heard quite clearly from the street. This is our only chance, Heather said. If we don't get the tickets now, it will be too late. Are you sure he'll bring them today? It was Lorraine's voice. Daryl told him to bring all the documents. The old man won't suspect a thing, I froze. Old man? Is that what they call me behind my back? What if he notices that a ticket is missing? Byron asked. We'll say that his ticket requires special processing because of his age, Heather replied. We'll say we'll take care of everything ourselves. Then the day before departure, we'll say that there's been a problem and the cruise company doesn't recommend people with his condition to travel. What condition? Byron protested. He's healthier than many of my friends. He doesn't know that we know, but he has high blood pressure. Daryl's voice interjected. I felt the blood rush to my face. Yes, I sometimes have high blood pressure, but it's a mild form of hypertension that is controlled by diet. Nothing prevents me from traveling. We'll say that his doctor doesn't recommend long sea voyages. Will he believe that? Lorraine's voice sounded doubtful. Of course he will, Heather said confidently. He always listens to Daryl. Besides, what choice does he have? We have the tickets, and the cruise is in 3 days. He'll just have to accept it. And can you imagine how much we'll save? Byron added. One less cabin, plus we won't have to drag the old man along on all the excursions. He'd just slow everyone down. And less tips, Lorraine chimed in. On cruises like this, that's a decent amount. The main thing is that he doesn't find out ahead of time, said Daryl. His voice sounded less confident than the others. I'm still worried. It's not fair to him. Daryl, dear, Heather's voice took on a honeyed tone I knew well. We're doing this for his own good. He'll be much more comfortable at home than rocking around on a ship for 2 weeks. You've seen how tired he's been lately. I felt everything boiling up inside me. They didn't just want to exclude me from the trip I had paid for. They were discussing it as if they were doing me a favor. And my son, my own son, was part of this conspiracy. I don't know, Daryl began. It'll be fine, Heather interrupted him. Just do as we agreed. When he arrives, I'll start a conversation about the tours. You'll ask to see his documents, and then you'll offer him tea. While you're in the kitchen, I'll make copies of everything we need. What if he doesn't bring his documents? Daryl asked. Then we'll have to go to his house, Heather replied. Do you know where he keeps his important papers? In his office, in the safe behind the painting, Daryl replied. But I don't know the combination. Then we'll have to get him talking, Heather sighed. Old people love to talk about the past. Ask him about important dates, his mother's birthday, your anniversary, something like that. Chances are that will be the code. I couldn't believe my ears. They were planning to search my house, break into the safe. The whole situation seemed like a cheap detective series, but it was happening in real life, with people I considered family. Quiet, Byron said suddenly. I think the car is here. I quickly ducked down, even though it was unlikely anyone could see me from the house. I was shaking with anger and resentment. I started the engine and slowly drove out of the driveway, trying not to make any noise. I stopped on the next street and took out my phone. Sorry, I can't come. I suddenly feel unwell. Let's talk another time, I wrote to Daryl. The reply came almost instantly. What happened? Should we come over? No, just feeling a little under the weather. I need some rest, I replied. Get well soon then. By the way, don't forget to bring your cruise documents next time. The message confirmed everything I had heard. All the way home, I tried to make sense of what had happened. Daryl's betrayal hurt the most. I always knew that Heather and her parents were only interested in my money, but I hoped that my son still loved me. Now that illusion was gone. When I got home, the first thing I did was check the safe. The code really did contain Sarah's date of birth. I changed it to a random combination of numbers and moved all my important documents, including the cruise tickets, to another location, a bank safe deposit box, which I rented the next morning. The next 2 weeks turned into a strange game of cat and mouse. Heather called every day, coming up with new reasons to meet. Daryl showed up twice without warning, clearly hoping to catch me off guard. Once I even noticed Byron's car parked at the end of the street. He was watching my house. I pretended not to suspect anything, but I never let the documents out of my sight when they were at home. In their presence, I even accidentally mentioned several times that the documents were now stored in a safe place where no one would find them. A week before the cruise, the tension reached its peak. Heather called and demanded an immediate meeting. Andrew, we need to get the documents urgently, her voice sounded insistent. The cruise company is asking for confirmation of some details, and we need the original tickets. That's strange, I replied. No one called me. They contacted Daryl because his contact information is also listed on the reservation, she quickly replied. Can we come over tonight? I agreed, deciding it was time for a showdown. There were only 5 days left before departure, and they were clearly getting desperate. That evening, Heather and Daryl arrived with her parents. They looked tense but tried to hide it with feigned cheerfulness. "So, are you ready for an adventure?" Lorraine asked, settling into a chair. "More than ready," I replied. "I can't wait for us all to enjoy the sea and the sun together." "About that," Heather began, glancing at Daryl. "We wanted to talk about the details of the trip." "Of course," I smiled. "What exactly are you interested in?" "We need tickets," Byron said bluntly. "It's time to take care of boarding passes and other nonsense." "Oh, the documents," I nodded. "They're in a safe place. I'll take care of everything a couple of days before departure." "But that's not very convenient," Heather insisted. "We'd like to check everything ourselves to make sure there are no mistakes." "What mistakes could there be?" I spread my arms. "I checked everything twice when I made the reservation." "Dad," Daryl interjected, "just give us the tickets. It'll be easier for everyone." His tone, commanding and impatient, was the last straw. "Easier for whom?" I asked quietly. "For you, so you can exclude me from the trip?" A deathly silence fell. Heather was the first to recover. "What are you talking about?" She laughed nervously. "How could we exclude you?" "It's your gift." "Exactly." I looked her straight in the eye. "My gift. A cruise I paid for the whole family, including me." "Dad, no one is going to exclude you," Daryl interjected, but his voice was shaking. "Right?" I got up from my chair. "Then why do you need all the tickets 5 days before departure?" Why was Heather interested in which cabin I would be staying in? Why did you discuss my alleged illness that would supposedly prevent me from traveling? Their faces stretched with surprise. "You were eavesdropping on us," Daryl managed to say. "I didn't have to eavesdrop," I replied. "You were talking so loudly that I could hear you from the street. Your whole plan is to get rid of the old man who's holding everyone back." Lorraine was the first to try to fix the situation. "Andrew, you've got the wrong idea. We were worried about your health. Travel like this can be exhausting." "Don't bother, Lorraine," I interrupted her. "I heard everything. About saving money on the cabin and how Daryl was going to find out the code to my safe. By the way, I changed it, and the documents are now in a different place." Byron flushed with anger. "You're acting paranoid," he muttered. "No, I'm acting like someone who is being deceived by his own relatives," I retorted. "And you know what? I'm keeping the tickets until the day of departure. If you want to go, you'll have to put up with my presence." Heather shot Daryl a withering look, as if he were to blame for the failure of their plan. "We have to go," she said sharply, getting up. "We'll come back to this conversation later." "I'm sure we will," I replied. "There are only 5 days left before the cruise. Time is running out, isn't it?" They left without saying goodbye. Daryl turned around at the door with a guilty look on his face, but didn't say a word. Left alone, I felt not anger, but a strange emptiness. I had finally seen the true face of my family, and it was much uglier than I could have imagined. They didn't just dislike me, they actively tried to use and deceive me, without the slightest twinge of conscience. What should I do next? The cruise, intended as an opportunity to grow closer, had turned into a battlefield. Cancel it? Go alone? Pretend nothing had happened and endure their company for 2 weeks? None of the options seemed appealing, but one thing I knew for sure: I would no longer allow them to think of me as a weak and helpless old man who could be manipulated. It was time to show that Andrew Woodhouse was still capable of standing up for himself. 3 days before departure, I took the tickets out of the safe deposit box and brought them home. Despite the recent conflict, I still hoped that we could go on this trip as a family. Perhaps naively, but part of me believed that exposing their plans would make them reconsider their attitude towards me. That evening, Daryl called. "Dad, can I come over?" "We need to talk." His voice sounded depressed, and I allowed myself to hope that my son had come to his senses. "Of course, son. I'll be waiting." An hour later, he arrived. Alone, without Heather, which was already a good sign. I made tea and laid out cookies on the living room table. The same cinnamon ones he loved as a child. "It's been a long time since we sat like this," I remarked, handing him a cup. Daryl nodded without looking up. "Dad, about what happened?" "I want to apologize." "I'm listening," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "It was all Heather and her parents' idea," he began. "They decided it would be hard for you to travel at well, considering your age." 65? I chuckled. "Byron is 67, I think, and no one is concerned about his well-being. I know it sounds silly, Daryl sighed. They just don't realize they're hurting you. They're thinking about the practical side of things, the practical side of saving money on one cabin. He grimaced. Dad, I talked to them. We all want you to come with us. Really, really? I looked him in the eye. And Heather wants you to come too. Daryl looked away. She agreed it would be fair. After all, you paid for the whole cruise. I nodded. Okay, then we'll all go to the port together in 2 days. I have the tickets and I'll hand them out before boarding. About that, Daryl rubbed his neck nervously. Heather thinks it would be better if we had the tickets. For reliability. Reliability? I raised an eyebrow. You think I'll lose them? No, of course not. He waved his hands hastily. It's just that Heather likes to be in control. You know how organized she is. Organize, I repeated. Okay, let's do this. I'll give you your tickets on the day of departure, and I'll keep mine. That way, everyone will be more relaxed. Daryl paused, clearly thinking about how to convince me to give him all the tickets. Dad, listen. He put his cup on the table. The tickets are electronic, and they need to be printed in a specific format. Heather found a special service that will do it right. We want to pick them up now so that everything is ready in advance. I looked at my son and realized with bitterness that he was lying to my face. There was no special service. The tickets I had printed were completely standard and ready to use. Daryl, I said quietly, don't lie to me. Please, he flinched. I'm not lying, I'm just doing Heather's bidding, I finished for him. As always. You know, it hurts me to see what you've become. Where was that confident boy who always told the truth, even when it wasn't convenient? I just want everyone to be happy, he muttered. Heather, her parents, you. Why is it so hard? Because some people are only happy at the expense of others, I replied. Go home, Daryl. Tell Heather that I'll return the tickets on the day of departure. We'll all go to the port together. He left disappointed, and I remained sitting in the living room, staring at my cold tea. The son I had raised, who once looked up to me with admiration, was now willing to deceive me for the sake of his wife's peace of mind. This realization caused me almost physical pain. The next day passed without incident. No one called or came. I packed my suitcase, checked my documents, and decided to go to bed early so I would be fresh on the day of departure. Tomorrow, our family trip was supposed to begin, although I was less and less convinced that it would bring any joy. I was awakened by the doorbell. The clock showed 6 in the morning. Who could be coming so early? Heather was standing at the door, alone without Daryl. She was dressed in an expensive suit, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, as if she were going to a business meeting, not a cruise. Good morning, Andrew. Her voice sounded unnaturally cheerful. I hope I didn't wake you? You did, I replied honestly. To what do I owe such an early visit? I came for the tickets. She smiled, but her eyes remained cold. We need to leave in 2 hours and you still need to get ready. I'm already packed, I replied, and we agreed to meet at 10. The plans have changed a little. She took a step forward as if about to enter. Byron has received information about possible traffic jams on the road to the port. We need to leave earlier. I didn't move, blocking the passage. Where's Daryl? He's finishing up, Heather began to show impatience. Andrew, we're really in a hurry. Tickets, please. We agreed to go together, I reminded her. I'll give you the tickets when we all meet up. Her friendly mask began to crack. Listen, we don't have time for games. Tickets. Now at that moment, I noticed that only her car was in the driveway. No Daryl, no her parents. Where are the others? I asked bluntly. They're waiting somewhere else, she snapped. Andrew, for the last time, give me the tickets. I realized she wouldn't leave without them, and most likely she had a plan B in case I refused. Wait here, I said and closed the door. I went up to the study where the documents were. It's funny, but I was still hesitant. Maybe they really were worried about traffic. Maybe it would be smarter to give them the tickets and then meet them at the port. But the inner voice that had been growing louder in recent weeks told me that I would be deceived again, that they were looking for a way to exclude me from the trip, and if I gave them the tickets, I would be playing into their hands. In the end, I decided on a compromise. I took only their 4 tickets, leaving mine in the safe. Let them go if they're so eager, and I'll come later on my own. When I returned to the door, Heather was talking on the phone. He won't give them to me. Yes, I'm trying. Wait, He's coming. She quickly hid the phone. Here, I handed her 4 envelopes. Your tickets. I'm keeping mine and will come to the port on my own. She glanced at the envelopes, quickly counted them, and frowned. All the tickets, Andrew. I told you I'm keeping mine. No, you don't understand. Her tone became condescending, as if she were explaining something to a child. You're not coming with us. I froze. What did you say? You're staying home, she repeated clearly. Your health doesn't allow for such a trip. We discussed it with Daryl and made a decision. You made a decision? I felt the blood rush to my face. About a trip I paid for? Andrew, be reasonable. She tried to sound concerned. At your age, trips like this are too exhausting. You'll only ruin the vacation for yourself and for us. Where's Daryl? I demanded. I want to talk to him. He agrees with me, she snapped. Listen, we don't have much time. Give us the last ticket and we'll close this matter. I looked at this woman who treated me with such contempt in my own home and felt not just anger rising inside me, but real rage. Get out, I said quietly. Excuse me. She blinked. Get out of my house, I repeated louder, and forget about the cruise. No one is going anywhere. Don't be silly, she laughed, but there was uncertainty in her laughter. The cruise is paid for. I have the tickets. We're going anyway. No, I shook my head. The cruise was paid for with my credit card. The reservation is in my name, and I have every right to cancel it. Her face changed. You wouldn't dare. I would. I felt a strange calmness as I made this decision. Neither you, nor your parents, nor even my son deserve this trip. I will not finance people who treat me with such contempt. Andrew, be reasonable. She tried to change tactics. If you cancel the cruise, Daryl will suffer. He's been looking forward to this trip. Daryl made his choice, I replied. He chose you and your manipulation over respect for his father. Let him live with the consequences. I'll tell him what a selfish person you are, she threatened. He'll never forgive you for this. And I'll tell him how his wife came at 6 a.m. to pick up the tickets and exclude his father from the trip, I countered. Let's see what he says. Heather pressed her lips into a thin line. I saw the emotions change in her eyes. Anger, calculation, a new strategy. Okay, she suddenly smiled. You're right. I was wrong. Of course you should come with us. Let's forget this unpleasant moment and go back to the original plan. All the tickets, and we'll meet at 10. She held out 4 envelopes to me, but I didn't move. It's too late, Heather. I've already made my decision. What decision? Her voice became tense. There will be no cruise for any of us. You can't do this, she almost shouted. We've already planned everything, packed our bags. My parents canceled important meetings. I'm very sorry, I replied without regret in my voice. But the decision has been made. She looked at me with such hatred that for a moment I thought she was capable of physical violence. But instead, Heather turned around, ran down the porch steps, and got into her car. The last glance she gave me promised that this confrontation was not over. I closed the door and immediately went to the phone. I knew I didn't have much time. As soon as Heather contacted the others, they might try to get ahead of me. The cruise company answered after the 3rd ring. Caribbean Cruises, how can I help you? Good morning, I tried to speak calmly. I need to cancel a reservation. The reservation number is KR876532. One moment, sir. I'll check the information. The operator continued after a short pause. Mr. Woodhouse? A reservation for 5, departing today at 4 p.m.? That's correct. Sir, I must warn you that if you cancel on the day of departure, there will be no refund. You will lose the entire amount. I thought for a moment. It was a significant amount of money. But then I saw Heather's face, her contemptuous tone, when she said, You're staying home. And Daryl's face, who couldn't find the strength to defend his father. I understand. Please cancel it anyway. May I ask the reason for the cancellation, sir? Family circumstances, I replied curtly. Okay, sir. The reservation has been canceled. A confirmation will be sent to your email address. One more question, I added. If someone from my group tries to check in for the cruise with these tickets, what will happen? They won't be able to check in, sir. The tickets have been canceled. Thank you. I hung up and took a deep breath. It was done. The money was lost, but I felt a strange sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, I had acted decisively to protect my own dignity, rather than trying to please a family that didn't appreciate it. The phone rang almost immediately. I glanced at the screen. Daryl. I didn't answer. A minute later, a message came in. "Dad, what's going on?" Heather came back in hysterics. "What did you say to her?" I put the phone down. Let Heather explain what happened herself. I was sure her version would be very different from reality, but I didn't care anymore. The phone kept ringing. Daryl again, then Byron, then a number I didn't recognize, probably Lorraine. I turned off the sound. Then, after some thought, I turned off the phone completely. I needed silence to process what had happened and decide what to do next. I sat down in a chair by the window, which overlooked the street. Strangely, instead of regret or anger, I felt a sense of peace. It was as if I had finally shed a heavy burden that I had been carrying for years. Around 9 in the morning, Byron's car, a large black SUV, appeared on the street. It stopped in front of my house, but no one got out. I could see silhouettes in the car, clearly arguing. Finally, the door opened and Daryl headed for the house. Alone. I didn't move when the doorbell rang. I didn't answer the knock, which was becoming more and more insistent. Finally, Daryl shouted, "Dad, I know you're home. Open up, we need to talk." I remained silent. After a few minutes, he gave up and returned to the car. They sat there for a while longer, glancing periodically at my house. Then the car drove away. I assumed they would go straight to the port, hoping that there had been some mistake and their tickets were still valid. I wondered which of them would be the first to suggest this idea and how they would react when they learned the truth. An hour after they left, my neighbor Harold Finch, a retiree with whom I sometimes played chess, called me. "Andrew, are you home?" he asked. "Has anyone been to your house?" "I'm fine, Harold," I replied. "Why do you ask?" "I just saw your relatives leave with their suitcases. Then they came back and knocked on your door. Now they're gone again, altogether. I thought maybe something had happened." "It's nothing serious," I said, feeling grateful for his concern. "Just a little misunderstanding." "They were going on a trip. I see," he said after a pause. "They didn't look very happy." "I think their plans changed," I said. "Well, if you need anything, you know where to find me," Harold offered. "Thanks, buddy." "I appreciate it." After talking to Harold, I turned off my phone again. I didn't want to hear accusations and excuses. I didn't want to explain my decision or defend myself. I needed time to think about what to do next, how to build a relationship with my son and his family after this incident. I sat down at the table and wrote a letter to Daryl, old-fashioned, by hand. I described what had happened that morning, explained my feelings and decisions. I didn't apologize or accuse, I just stated the facts. I ended with the words, "I will always love you, son, but I will no longer allow you or anyone else to treat me with disrespect. We can talk when you are ready to hear my side of the story." I put the letter aside. I would send it later, when things had calmed down a bit. Around noon, I saw a taxi pull up on the street. All four of them got out, Daryl, Heather, and her parents. They looked worn out, like people who had experienced a great disappointment. They unloaded their suitcases and went into Harold's house. Apparently, they wanted to know if he had seen me. A few minutes later, they came out and got into Byron's car, which had been parked at the curb the whole time. I noticed Daryl looking longingly at my house before getting into the car. Then they drove away, presumably toward Heather's parents' house. I watched them go and wondered how they were feeling now. Anger at me? Disappointment at their ruined vacation? Or perhaps even a hint of remorse for their behavior. However, it didn't matter anymore. I had made my decision and was ready to live with the consequences. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was not a victim of circumstances, but the master of my own destiny. I knew they would start calling again soon. They would demand explanations, express outrage, perhaps even make threats. But right now, in the silence of my home, looking at the empty street, I felt a strange satisfaction. The wind rustled the curtains, birds sang in the garden, and life went on. Without a cruise, without the illusion of family unity, but with a new sense of self-worth that I would not trade for any Caribbean beach. By evening, the house had become too quiet. The silence weighed on my ears, forcing me to remember every turn of the morning's events. I turned on the radio, but classical music, usually soothing, seemed out of place today. Turning off the radio, I sat down in an armchair and looked at the silent phone. It had been almost 12 hours since I canceled the cruise. 12 hours since Heather came to demand the tickets. 12 hours of complete silence. I hadn't turned on my phone, checked my email, or even gone out on the porch afraid of running into one of them. But eternal silence is impossible. Sooner or later, I would have to face the consequences of my decision. Better to do it on my own terms than wait for them to burst into my house with accusations. I picked up the phone and turned it on. The device immediately came to life, vibrating with a flood of notifications. 76 missed calls, 42 messages, 3 voicemails. The calls were mostly from Daryl and Heather, a few from Byron, a couple from unknown numbers. Probably Lorraine calling from different phones when I didn't answer her main one. I started looking through the text messages, piecing together the chronology of their day. The first ones were from Daryl, sent right after Heather's visit. "Dad, what's going on? Why aren't you answering the door? Heather is hysterical. What did you say to her?" Then the tone changed. "We're going to the port. Talk later." And a couple of hours later, "Did you really cancel the cruise? Answer immediately." This was followed by a stream of angry messages from Heather. "You had no right. This is despicable. Do you even realize how much planning went into this? Daryl is shocked by your behavior." Byron was more concise, but no less sharp. "Woodhouse, this is beyond the pale. We demand compensation, immediately." Around 2 p.m., the messages took on a new tone. They arrived at the airport and discovered that their tickets to the cruise departure port were invalid. "Dad, the airport says our tickets have been canceled." "What's going on?" Daryl wrote. "We're stuck at the airport. Is this your doing?" "Fix this immediately," Heather demanded. "This is a legal violation." "I'm going to sue," Byron threatened. I couldn't help but smile. When I canceled the cruise, I didn't think about the fact that the airline tickets included in the package would also be canceled. It was an unexpected but pleasant bonus. The last messages were sent about an hour ago. "We're coming to you." "We need to have a serious talk," Daryl wrote. I checked my voice messages. The first was from Heather, her voice trembling with rage. "Andrew, you've crossed the line. We're stuck at the airport like some kind of budget tourists. People are looking at us. If you don't fix this immediately, I swear you'll regret it." The second message was from Byron. "Woodhouse, this is extremely irresponsible. We spent time and money preparing for this trip. Lorraine canceled an important appointment with her beautician. I demand immediate compensation or my lawyer will be in touch." The third message surprised me. It was Daryl and his voice sounded not angry but rather confused. "Dad, I don't understand what's going on. If this is because of this morning's conversation with Heather, then I'm sorry, I didn't know she was going to say that to you. Please call me back. We need to talk." I put the phone down, so they were stuck at the airport having discovered that their tickets had been canceled. Then they probably contacted the cruise line and found out that the whole trip had been canceled. And now they were coming to me for answers. It was almost 6 o'clock. If they had left the airport an hour ago, they should be here soon. I had several options. Leave the house, not open the door, or meet them face to face. I chose the third option. It was time to stop hiding and openly state my position. While I waited for them to arrive, my mind returned to other occasions when I had been disrespected by Heather and her parents. There were so many that they almost merged into one constant background of neglect. There were minor incidents. Heather accidentally forgetting to invite me to Daryl's birthday party. Byron calling my house an old dump that's long, overdue to be sold. Lorraine asking in front of everyone if it wasn't too expensive to maintain the house on a single pension. There were also more serious offenses, like 2 years ago when I came down with the flu and called Daryl to ask him to bring me some medicine. He promised to come over that evening, but never showed up. The next day, he apologized, explaining that Heather had organized a surprise dinner with her boss and he couldn't refuse. I spent the night with a high fever, without medicine, while my son entertained his wife's boss. Or the incident last fall when Heather borrowed my rare coin collection for her niece's school project without asking permission. When I discovered the loss and called in a panic, she was surprised by my reaction. "They're just old coins, Andrew." "Don't be so dramatic." I got the collection back a week later with a few missing pieces that had supposedly gone missing. But the most painful incident was on the anniversary of Sarah's death. I invited Daryl to spend the day with me. just to sit and remember his mother. He agreed but canceled at the last minute. Later, I learned from a mutual friend that Heather was hosting a barbecue for her colleagues that day, and Daryl was supposed to play the role of the gracious host. For years, I swallowed my resentment, justifying their behavior. They are young, they have their own lives, Daryl is under his wife's influence. I was afraid of losing my last connection with my son, so I endured the humiliation, which became more and more egregious each time. But today's incident was the last straw. Heather came to my house at 6 in the morning to pick up the tickets and stated outright that I was not going with them, that they had made a decision about my participation in the trip, which I had paid for in full. It was no longer just disrespect. It was outright mockery. And I finally said no, not just to this particular situation, but to the whole pattern of a relationship where I was both a convenient ATM and a burden. My thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of my phone. I expected to see Daryl or Heather's name, but the screen lit up with Oliver Grant, my old friend and lawyer, whom I hadn't spoken to in several months. "Oliver?" I answered in surprise. "Andrew, glad I caught you." His voice sounded cheerful. "I have good news. The documents are ready. You can come by tomorrow to sign them, or I can deliver them to you." I was confused for a moment until I remembered what he was talking about. About a month ago, right after booking the cruise, I contacted Oliver to update my will. At the time, it was just a formality. I wanted to make sure that, in the event of my death, the house and my main assets would pass to Daryl without any unnecessary complications. But now, after today's events, these documents took on a whole new meaning. "Oliver, we may need to make some changes," I said slowly. "There have been events that are causing me to reconsider some decisions." "Something serious?" There was professional concern in his voice. "Serious enough to completely revise the will," I replied. "Can you come tomorrow?" "I need some advice." "Of course, Andrew. I'll be there at 10 in the morning. Is it urgent?" "Not life-threatening, but I'd like to resolve this issue as soon as possible." "Understood. See you tomorrow then?" "See you tomorrow, Oliver." And thank you, I hung up, feeling strangely calm. The decision came naturally, without hesitation. If Daryl and his new family valued me so little while I was alive, why should they benefit after my death? My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up. Through the window, I saw Byron's black SUV stop in front of my house. All four of them got out: Daryl, Heather, and her parents. Their faces expressed varying degrees of anger and indignation. Heather was talking heatedly, waving her arms. Byron was frowning. Lorraine was fixing her hair as if preparing for an important meeting. Only Daryl looked uncertain, glancing at the windows of the house. I took a deep breath and went to open the door, preparing for a confrontation. "Andrew," Heather almost shouted when she saw me, "do you realize what you've done? We spent the whole day at the airport. They wouldn't let us on the plane. We had to call a taxi to come back." "Good evening, Heather," I said calmly. "Daryl, Byron, Lorraine, come in if you want to talk." "Talk?" Byron snorted. "We demand compensation, immediately." "Compensation for what exactly?" I looked him in the eye. "For a ruined vacation, for wasted time, for emotional distress." "Interesting," I nodded. "And what compensation do you offer for trying to exclude me from a trip that I paid for? For planning to use my money while leaving me at home?" Byron opened his mouth but couldn't find an answer. "Dad," Daryl interjected, "let's talk calmly. I understand you're upset, but canceling the whole trip—" "I'm not upset, Daryl," I interrupted. "I've made my decision. Just as you made the decision to exclude me from the cruise." "No one was going to exclude you," he exclaimed. "Right?" I looked at Heather. "Isn't that right, Heather? Tell your husband what you told me this morning, that you discussed and decided that I should stay home." Heather paled but quickly regained her composure. "I was acting in your best interest, Andrew. Such a trip is too exhausting for someone your age." "My age," I repeated. "You mean Byron's age? He's 2 years older than me, if I'm not mistaken." Lorraine intervened, trying to smooth things over. "Andrew, dear, there has been a misunderstanding. We were all stressed out preparing for the trip." Heather expressed herself incorrectly. "Of course we wanted you to come with us. So much so that you came to pick up the tickets at 6 in the morning? So much so that you discussed how to get the code to my safe? So much that you planned to tell me about canceling my participation the day before departure?" They exchanged confused glances. How did you... Byron began. I heard your conversation. Your whole plan, in every detail. There was silence. Daryl looked as if he had been punched in the gut. Dad, I didn't know, he began. Didn't know what? That your wife came to my house and told me straight up that I wasn't going? That you discussed how to save money on my cabin and tips? That you call me old man behind my back? Daryl lowered his eyes. I wasn't involved in everything. But you didn't stop this charade, I remarked. As always, you took your wife's side, even when she was planning to deceive your father. Enough, Heather said sharply. We're not going to stand here and listen to accusations. You ruined our vacation, and now you have to make up for it. I laughed, which only made her more indignant. Make up for it? I already lost all the money for the cruise. Tens of thousands of dollars, and you know what? I don't regret a thing. It was the best investment in my peace of mind. What does that mean? Daryl asked cautiously. It means that I finally saw the true face of your family, I replied. And I decided that I've had enough. Enough of putting up with disrespect, enough of being an ATM, enough of pretending that we're one happy family. Dad, I'm done, Daryl. This morning I spoke with Oliver Grant. You know, my lawyer. At the mention of a lawyer, everyone tensed up. Why do you need a lawyer? Byron asked. If you're thinking of suing us... No, Byron, I'm not going to sue. I'm updating my will. The words hung heavy and significant in the air. Lorraine was the first to grasp their meaning. Andrew, let's not make any rash decisions, she said, trying to smile. We're all upset, but that's no reason to take such serious measures. I think it's a very serious reason, I replied, and my decision is not hasty. It had been brewing for years with every display of disrespect, with every attempt at manipulation. Are you disinheriting me? Daryl asked bluntly. His face turned pale. I'm meeting with Oliver tomorrow to discuss the details, I replied evasively. But yes, I am revising my will. Completely. Because of one incident? Heather exclaimed. That's unfair. Not because of one incident, Heather. It's because of a consistent pattern of behavior. For years, you've all treated me like an ATM with a walking app. For years, I've endured disrespect, lies, and manipulation. For years, I've excused your behavior in the hope of preserving some semblance of a family. But today, I realize that I don't have a real family. There are only people waiting for me to die so they can get their inheritance. That's not true, Daryl exclaimed. You never what? I interrupted. Never thought about my money? Then why did you turn pale at the thought of losing your inheritance? Why was your first question about that, and not about why your father feels so unaccepted and disrespected in his own family? Daryl had no answer. Byron tried to take control of the situation. Listen, Woodhouse, we're all tired and upset. Let's put this conversation off until tomorrow, when everyone has calmed down. Good idea, and I agreed. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to be alone. But we're not finished, Heather protested. You can't just... I can, I said firmly. This is my house, and I'm asking you to leave. They exchanged glances, not knowing what to do. Finally, Lorraine took the initiative. Let's go, dear ones. Andrew is right. We all need to calm down. We'll talk tomorrow with a clear head. They reluctantly headed for the door. At the door, Daryl turned around. Dad, please don't make any rash decisions. Let's talk tomorrow, just you and me. I nodded without making any promises. When the door closed behind them, I returned to the living room and sank into an armchair. Strangely, I felt not anger or bitterness, but relief. It was as if a heavy burden I had been carrying for years had been lifted from my shoulders. The phone rang again. Oliver. Andrew, sorry for calling so late. I looked over your case and remembered something else. You mentioned that you wanted to include some charitable donations? Yes, Oliver. The Senior Citizens Support Fund we talked about, and maybe a couple of other organizations. Will discuss the details tomorrow. Sure, I'll prepare all the options. See you tomorrow, Andrew. See you tomorrow, Oliver. I put the phone down and looked out the window. It was getting dark outside. Tomorrow would be a new day and a new beginning. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life, and it felt good. The morning began with a phone call. Oliver informed me that he would be delayed by an hour due to an unexpected court appearance, and suggested postponing our meeting until 11. I agreed, pleased to have additional time to reflect. After talking to my lawyer, I sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a notebook. I needed to organize my thoughts on how exactly to change the will. I had already decided that the bulk of the estate would go to a charitable foundation supporting the elderly, but there were still details that needed to be thought through. Maybe I should leave Daryl something. Despite his behavior, he was still my son. But every time I was tempted to soften my position, I saw Heather's face when she said, "You're staying home." And Daryl's expression when he asked about his inheritance first, rather than my feelings. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up. Looking out the window, I saw Daryl's car. He had come alone without Heather, which was unusual. In recent years, she rarely let him go anywhere alone, especially to see me. I opened the door before he had a chance to ring the bell. Daryl looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept all night. "Hi, Dad," he said uncertainly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside silently, letting him into the house. We went into the kitchen where I silently set a cup of coffee in front of him. Black, no sugar, just the way he always liked it. "Are you alone?" I asked, though the answer was obvious. "Yes," he smiled weakly. "I decided we needed to talk alone. Without the support group. Does Heather know you're here?" He shook his head. "I told her I was going to work. We had a difficult evening yesterday." "I can imagine." I sat down across from him. "What did you want to talk about?" Daryl took a sip of coffee, as if gathering his thoughts. "About yesterday. About the cruise. About the will." He looked up at me. "Dad, are you really going to disinherit me?" The directness of the question didn't surprise me. The financial side of things had always mattered most to him. "I'm going to change the will," I replied. "Oliver will be here in an hour, and we'll discuss the details." "Because of one incident?" There was hurt in his voice. "Don't you think that's a bit excessive?" "One?" I raised an eyebrow. "Daryl, that incident was the culmination of years of neglect and disrespect. Years of you standing by and allowing your wife and her parents to treat me like a walking ATM. That's not fair." He shook his head. "I've always respected you. Always defended me to Heather." "Really?" I couldn't hold back the sarcasm. "And how exactly did you defend me when they were planning to steal my tickets? When they were discussing how to get the code to the safe? When they called me the old man who would slow everyone down?" Daryl lowered his eyes. "I didn't participate in those conversations." "But you didn't stop them either," I pointed out. "You didn't tell your wife that it was unacceptable to exclude your father from a trip he had paid for in full." Our conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling up. Through the window, I saw Byron's big black SUV. "Looks like your support group has arrived after all," I remarked dryly. Daryl glanced out the window and grimaced. "I didn't invite them, Dad." "Honestly, but I'm not surprised they showed up," I remarked, heading for the door. Heather, Byron, and Lorraine were standing in the doorway. Heather looked impeccable, as always. Perfect makeup, expensive suit, cold smile. The contrast with Daryl's exhausted appearance was striking. "Andrew," she nodded, "we came to talk." "All three of you?" I didn't hide my irony. "What an honor. Is Daryl here?" She tried to look over my shoulder. "His car is at the house." "Yes, he's in the kitchen." I stepped back, letting them in. "He came to talk to his father." "Alone." Heather ignored the hint and headed decisively for the kitchen, where Daryl met her with a surprised and not particularly happy look. "Honey," she approached and put her hand on his shoulder. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming here?" "I would have come with you." "I wanted to talk to my father alone," he replied, not looking at her. "About what?" Her tone became suspicious. "About what happened. About the cruise. About various things." Byron intervened, clearly wanting to take control of the conversation. "Woodhouse, we came here to discuss compensation. What you did is unacceptable. We spent money preparing for the trip. New clothes, accessories, services." "There will be no compensation," I interrupted him. "I've already lost all the money for the cruise. That's more than enough payment for the lesson I've learned." "Lesson?" Lorraine exclaimed indignantly. "What lesson?" "About who my family really is," I replied calmly, "and what they're worth." Heather couldn't take it anymore. "Stop playing the victim. You ruined 5 people's vacations because of your senile whims. Heather, Daryl snapped at her, but she couldn't stop. What? It's true. He spent thousands of dollars to get revenge on us. Who does that? Only a selfish, vindictive old man. I looked at her, and for the first time since we'd known each other, I saw her true self. Without the mask of politeness, without the pretense. Just a greedy, petty woman enraged that she didn't get what she wanted. Selfishness, I repeated thoughtfully. An interesting word. Tell me, Heather, which is more selfish? Canceling a trip you have every right to take, or excluding the person who paid for it? We acted in your best interests, Lorraine interjected. A trip like this at your age. Stop it, I raised my hand. We all know it's not about my age or health. It's about you wanting to save money on the cabin and tips. It's about you thinking I'd be a burden that would slow everyone down. I heard your conversation, remember? At that moment, the doorbell rang. Oliver arrived at 11 sharp, as promised. This is my lawyer, I said, heading for the door. You can stay and hear everything firsthand. Oliver Grant, a tall, gray-haired man with a sharp gaze, looked a little surprised to see the living room full. Andrew, he shook my hand. I didn't know you had guests. We can reschedule if you prefer. No need, Oliver. I gestured for him to come in. This is my family. They're interested parties. Oliver nodded, professionally assessing the situation. I see. Are you sure you want to discuss the documents with them here? Absolutely, I pointed to a chair. Have a seat. Coffee? I wouldn't say no. He took a folder of documents out of his briefcase. I've prepared a few options, as we discussed. While I made coffee, a tense silence hung in the room. Heather stared at Oliver. Byron and Lorraine exchanged worried glances, and Daryl just stared at the floor, as if hoping to sink through it. So, Oliver said when I returned with the coffee, I've prepared an updated version of the will according to your instructions. The main changes concern the distribution of assets and the appointment of beneficiaries. Excellent, I said, sitting down opposite him. Tell me more. Oliver opened the folder and took out the documents. According to the new version, the main assets, including the house, investment portfolio, and insurance payments, will be transferred to the trust management of the support fund for elderly people who have been victims of family neglect. The fund will use the money to provide legal, psychological, and financial assistance to elderly people who have faced similar situations. What? Heather exclaimed. You're giving everything to some fund? That's absurd. Oliver looked at her with professional coldness. Madam, I am carrying out my client's wishes. And I must point out that legally speaking, this is a completely legitimate and reasonable decision. But that's unfair, Byron interjected. Daryl is his only son. And you, Oliver looked questioningly at Byron. Heather's parents, Daryl's wife, I explained. I see. Oliver nodded and continued. As I said, the bulk of the estate will go to the foundation. Personal belongings, family photographs, and memorabilia may be claimed by Daryl Woodhouse within 30 days of the will taking effect. This provision is made to preserve the family history. Byron, who had been trying to maintain a semblance of calm, finally lost his temper. This is outrageous. We won't let you rob our daughter and son-in-law. I'm not robbing anyone, I replied calmly. I dispose of my property as I see fit. We will contest this will, Byron threatened. We have connections, we have resources. Oliver calmly gathered the documents into his briefcase. Mr. Hicks, Byron hissed. Byron Hicks. Mr. Hicks, Oliver said in the tone of an experienced lawyer accustomed to such threats. You certainly have the right to contest any will. But I must warn you, this document is legally flawless. Andrew is of sound mind, as confirmed by a recent medical examination. He has every right to dispose of his property as he sees fit. Heather couldn't contain her indignation. So the decision is final? You're really going to give everything to strangers instead of your own son? The decision has been made, I confirmed firmly. Most of the property will go to the foundation. That's not up for discussion. You'll regret this, Heather blurted out. Daryl, say something. He's disinheriting you. Daryl looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and confusion. Dad, is there really no other way? His voice sounded almost pleading. I understand you're upset, but upset? I shook my head. No, Daryl, I'm not upset. I've just finally seen reality. For years, you've all treated me like a nuisance, like an ATM, like an old man who is only tolerated because of his potential inheritance. And you know what? I accept that reality, but I don't have to encourage it. Daryl, don't humiliate yourself, Heather said sharply. He's already made up his mind. Let him give his money to his poor old folks. We can manage without him. Of course you will, I nodded. You're young. You have jobs, you have parents who are willing to help. Unlike many older people who really need support. Let's get out of here. Heather grabbed Daryl's arm. There's nothing more for us to do here. Daryl hesitated, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. Resentment, disappointment, or perhaps a belated realization of what he had lost. Dad, Daryl, Heather tugged at his arm. Now! He let her lead him away, glancing back at me over his shoulder one last time. Byron and Lorraine followed them without saying a word. Only Byron muttered as he passed by. You'll regret this, Woodhouse. Trust me, the door slammed shut, and silence fell over the house. Oliver looked at me sympathetically. That was a difficult conversation. Yes, I sighed, but necessary. I put it off for too long. Are you sure about your decision? Oliver asked. It's a serious step. Absolutely sure, I nodded. They showed their true colors, and I'm not going to pretend I don't see it anymore. Oliver put his hand on my shoulder. You can always change the will if you change your mind. But I understand how you feel. Sometimes you have to let go of those who hurt you, even if they are family. When Oliver left, I was alone in the silence of my home. Strangely, I felt neither bitterness nor regret, only a calm confidence that I had done the right thing. I stood up for myself and decided to help those who really needed help. Through the window, I saw them getting into the car. Heather was saying something furiously, waving her arms. Daryl sat with his head down. Byron banged his fist on the steering wheel. Lorraine was fixing her hair in the mirror, as if her main concern was her appearance even at a time like this. When the car pulled away, I didn't feel the urge to call out to them, to stop them, to offer a compromise. Something had finally broken between us, something that could not be repaired. I signed the will the next day. Oliver brought in a notary and everything was made official. The bulk of my estate was now earmarked for a fund to support elderly people who had been victims of family neglect. Daryl called several times in the following days, but I didn't answer. What else could we say to each other? He had made his choice many years ago when he chose to remain silent and allow his wife and her parents to humiliate me, and I had finally made mine. In the evening, sitting in a chair by the window, I watched the setting sun and thought about how strange life is. You raise a child, put your heart and soul into them, hoping that they will become a close person, a support in your old age. And in the end, you find yourself a stranger, superfluous, a burden. But I no longer felt like a victim. I had made my decision and was ready to live with the consequences. The break was painful, but it was necessary. As Sarah said, sometimes you have to cut off a dry branch to save the tree. And my tree, well, my life, was not over yet. There were new decisions ahead, new opportunities, no toxic family, no manipulation, no constant feeling of being used. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. The week after the new will was signed passed in a strange silence. Daryl stopped calling after my fifth refusal to answer. Heather and her parents had apparently decided to act through lawyers. Oliver reported that he had received an official request for access to the documents from the law firm representing the Hicks Woodhouse family. Don't worry, Oliver assured me during a phone call. The will is flawless. They can spend as much money on lawyers as they want, but the outcome will be the same. I had no doubt about Oliver's professionalism, but the situation itself left a bitter taste in my mouth. Instead of trying to mend fences, they immediately resorted to legal action. This only confirmed that they were interested in my money, not me. One morning, while going through my mail, I came across a letter from the cruise company. They expressed their regret about the cancellation of the trip and informed me that, given the circumstances and my status as the primary payer, they were willing to refund part of the money as a gesture of goodwill. Not the full amount, but a significant portion of it. I reread the letter several times, not believing my eyes. It was unexpected but pleasant, a sign that sometimes justice does exist. At the end of the letter was a contact number and I called immediately. "Caribbean Cruises, how can I help you?" replied a pleasant female voice. "Good morning. My name is Andrew Woodhouse. I received a letter about a possible refund for a canceled cruise." "Mr. Woodhouse, yes, I see your information. Indeed, our company has decided on a partial refund in your case. We understand that the cancellation was due to unusual circumstances." I was surprised. "How did you find out about the circumstances?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "We have a recording of our conversation with you when you canceled your reservation. You mentioned family reasons. And later, one of the members of your group, a young woman, explained the situation to our employee at the port in a rather emotional manner. I could only imagine the scene Heather had made when she discovered that the tickets were invalid. The thought made me chuckle involuntarily. "Yes, I understand," I replied, "and I appreciate your decision. How do I get a refund?" "The funds will be transferred to the credit card used for payment within 5 to 7 business days. But Mr. Woodhouse, there is another option I would like to offer." "What is it?" "Instead of a refund, you can use this amount to book a new cruise. Moreover, given the situation, our company is willing to offer an additional 20% discount. This will allow you to book a similar trip, but just for yourself." The offer caught me off guard. I had never considered going on a cruise alone. Since Sarah's death, all my travels had been limited to short trips to neighboring cities. "That's interesting offer," I finally replied. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. The offer is valid for 30 days. Just contact us when you've made your decision." After our conversation, I couldn't stop thinking about this opportunity. A solo cruise? At 65? It seemed both frightening and strangely appealing. No obligations, no schedule except my own, no compromises, complete freedom. That evening, I took out the photo album from my last cruise with Sarah. We looked so happy on the deck, glasses in hand, against the backdrop of the setting sun. I ran my finger over her smiling face. "What would you say, darling?" I whispered. "Should I go alone? Or is that too sad for an old man?" I could almost hear her answer. "Don't be silly, Andrew. Life is too short to put off happiness." The next morning, I called the cruise company and confirmed that I wanted to use the refund for a new booking. The manager helped me choose a suitable option: a 2-week Caribbean cruise, departing in 3 weeks. A single cabin with a balcony, full board, all excursions included. "Excellent choice, Mr. Woodhouse," she said, completing the booking. "There are many interesting places on this route, and the weather is great there at this time of year." "I hope everything goes well," I replied, feeling a strange mixture of excitement and anxiety. "I have no doubt it will. We have many travelers your age who go on cruises alone. The ship has special events for single passengers where you can meet interesting people." This information reassured me a little. At least I won't be the only lonely old man on the ship. I spent the following weeks preparing. I updated my wardrobe, had a medical examination, and made sure that my house would be taken care of while I was away. I ordered an automatic watering system for the garden and arranged with my neighbor Harold to pick up my mail. 2 weeks in the Caribbean? Harold whistled when I told him about my plans. "Not bad, Andrew. What about your family?" "I'm going alone," I replied simply. Harold nodded understandingly. He knew about the situation with Daryl and Heather, although I had never gone into details. "Sometimes that's the best option," he said. "Not depending on anyone, following only your own schedule. At your age, and mine too, that's a real luxury." The day before I left, I faced an unexpected dilemma. Should I tell Daryl I was going away? On the one hand, I wasn't obligated to report to him. On the other, he might worry if he didn't find me at home for 2 weeks. After much deliberation, I decided to send a short message. "Going on a 2-week cruise. Harold will be looking after the house. I won't have access to my phone most of the time." The reply came almost instantly. "A cruise? That one? Who are you going with?" "No, a different road." "I'm going alone," I replied. There was a long pause before another message arrived. "Dad, we need to talk. Can I come over tonight?" I stared at those words, feeling a strange emptiness. A month ago, I would have been delighted by such an offer. But now? What could we say to each other that hadn't already been said? More importantly, did Daryl really want to talk to me? Or was this another attempt to influence my decision about the will? "I'm sorry, but I'm busy preparing for my departure." "We'll talk when I get back," I replied. This time there was no reply. The morning of my departure was clear and sunny, as if nature itself approved of my decision. I loaded my suitcase into a taxi and looked back at the house one last time. Strangely, I felt neither regret nor anxiety, only anticipation of new experiences. The drive to the port took about 3 hours. I looked out the window at the passing scenery and thought about how radically my life had changed over the past month. I had lost my family, or more accurately, I realized that I had lost them long ago. I had changed my will, disinheriting my son, and now I was setting off on a journey alone, something I had never done before. The port was noisy and crowded. Families with children, couples of all ages, groups of friends, all with suitcases, all excited about the journey ahead. I couldn't help looking for other solo travelers, but in this motley crowd it was difficult to tell who was with whom. Check-in was quick and easy. I was given a key card for my cabin, a schedule of events, and a map of the ship. The young employee who processed my documents smiled warmly. "Traveling alone, mister. Woodhouse, be sure to stop by the Horizon Lounge at 6 o'clock tonight. There will be a welcome cocktail for solo travelers. It's a great way to meet other passengers." I thanked her for the advice, although I wasn't sure I would take it. The thought of small talk with strangers caused me more anxiety than interest. My cabin was cozy and spacious. It had a large bed, a small sitting area, a bathroom, and most importantly, a balcony with 2 lounge chairs and a table. It was the perfect place to read or simply gaze out at the ocean. I unpacked my things, took a shower, and decided to explore the ship. The liner was huge, 12 decks, numerous restaurants, bars, shops, 2 swimming pools, a spa, and a theater. Walking around the decks, I watched the other passengers, their lively conversations, laughter, and plans for activities. Suddenly, I felt a pang of loneliness. Perhaps the idea of traveling alone wasn't so brilliant after all. Returning to my cabin, I sat on the balcony and watched as the port gradually receded. The ship slowly moved into the open sea, and the city on the shore became smaller and smaller. Symbolically, my former life was gradually receding as well. At 6 in the evening, after some hesitation, I decided to attend the welcome cocktail party for solo travelers. It wasn't that I was eager to socialize, but the prospect of spending the whole evening in my cabin was even less appealing. The Horizon Lounge was located on the upper deck, with floor-to-ceiling panoramic windows. When I entered, there were already about 20 people there, mostly my age or slightly younger. Waiters were handing out glasses of champagne and appetizers. "Welcome," greeted a middle-aged woman wearing an organizer's badge. "I'm Melissa, your activities coordinator for solo travelers." "What's your name?" "Andrew Woodhouse," I replied, feeling a little awkward. "Nice to meet you, Andrew." She handed me a glass of champagne. "Is this your first solo cruise?" "Yes, it is." "Don't worry, you'll quickly get the hang of it. We have a wonderful group on this cruise. Let me introduce you to some of them." She led me to a small group that was already engaged in lively conversation. "Attention, everyone. This is Andrew, traveling alone for the first time. Let's help him feel at home." "Welcome to the club," smiled a gray-haired woman in an elegant blue dress. "I'm Eleanor. This is my 3rd solo cruise. Believe me, you get used to it." "Norman," introduced a tall man with a thick mustache. "I was widowed 5 years ago, and since then I've been going on a cruise every year. It's the best cure for loneliness, I tell you." "And I'm Patricia," added a plump woman with a bright scarf around her neck. "I got divorced after 40 years of marriage. The children moved away, and I decided it was time to live for myself." To my surprise, the conversation flowed easily and naturally. No one asked about the reasons for my solo trip, but everyone willingly shared their stories. Norman lost his wife to cancer, just like me. Eleanor had never been married, preferring a career in medicine. Patricia left her husband when she discovered that he had been leading a double life for years. "Now I save money every year for travel," she said with a wink. "The same money I used to spend on his stupid golf clubs." By the end of the evening, I had exchanged contact details with several people and even arranged a morning game of golf simulator with Norman and 2 other men. Returning to my cabin, I stepped out onto the balcony. The night was warm, the ocean calm, and the sky studded with stars. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt such peace. Maybe losing my toxic family wasn't a loss, but a liberation. The following days confirmed this thought. I quickly blended into the group of solo travelers. We went on excursions together, dined at the same table, and attended evening shows. But at the same time, everyone had enough personal space. No one took offense if someone wanted to spend the day alone. I became especially close with Norman, Eleanor, and Patricia. We called ourselves the Magnificent Four and often gathered at the bar after dinner to discuss the day. You know what's the best thing about traveling at our age? Norman said one day as we sat on the deck watching the sunset. Freedom. No expectations, no obligations. Just you and the world, and no ungrateful children, Patricia added with a bitter laugh. My son called yesterday for the first time in a month. Do you know why? To ask for money for a new car. My daughter calls regularly, said Eleanor, but only to make sure I haven't changed my will yet. She thinks I don't notice. Their stories were painfully familiar. Yet there was no bitterness in their voices, only a calm acceptance of reality and a determination to enjoy life despite everything. Do you have children, Andrew? Patricia asked. One son, I replied after a pause. But we're not very close. Let me guess. Norman smiled. A greedy daughter-in-law? I laughed involuntarily. How did you know? Classic story, he shrugged. I have the same thing with my younger son. He married a girl who sees me as nothing more than a walking ATM. What did you do? I asked with interest. I changed my will, he winked. I left the bulk of it to a charity for homeless animals. My son was furious, but you know what? It's my money. I earned it through my own hard work, and I have the right to dispose of it as I see fit. I was struck by the similarity of our situations. I did the same thing. I rewrote everything to a fund to support the elderly. Excellent choice, Eleanor nodded approvingly. Money should be used for good, not to feed greed. At that moment, I realized that I had found people who truly understood me. No judgment, no attempts to convince me that family is the most important thing, just understanding and acceptance. On the 10th day of the cruise, sitting on the balcony of my cabin and watching the dolphins playing in the waves, I suddenly felt the need to close another chapter of my life. I took out my phone, which only worked at sea via satellite communication on the ship, and wrote a message to Daryl. Daryl, I'm halfway through the cruise and have thought a lot these past few days. I want you to know that I don't hate you. I understand that you are caught between a rock and a hard place, between your wife and your father. But the choice you made has consequences. I forgive you, but I no longer want to be a part of your life. This is my final decision. I wish you happiness. Dad. I sent the message and turned off my phone without waiting for a reply. I said everything I wanted to say and didn't need any more excuses or promises. On the last evening of the cruise for single travelers, a special dinner was organized. White tablecloths, candles, champagne, live music. Everything looked festive and elegant. To new friends, Patricia raised her glass. To the people who come into our lives, just when we need them. And to the freedom to be ourselves, Norman added, without expectations, without obligations, without compromises. To life that goes on no matter what, Eleanor chimed in. And to the family we choose, not the one we are born into, I finished, feeling a lump in my throat. We clinked glasses and drank, looking into each other's eyes with an understanding deeper than words. At that moment, I realized a simple truth. Family is not necessarily people connected by blood. Sometimes it is those who accept you as you are, without conditions or expectations. The next morning, standing on the deck and watching the shore approach, I thought about my upcoming return home. Strangely, I felt no anxiety or regret. On the contrary, I was filled with a calm anticipation. Life went on and new opportunities opened up. I exchanged contact details with my new friends, promising to stay in touch. We even discussed the possibility of getting together in 6 months for another trip, perhaps a river cruise through Europe. Remember, Andrew, Eleanor said as she hugged me tightly goodbye, you are not alone. You never have been and never will be. Her words stayed with me as I disembarked from the ship and got into a taxi headed for home. I really am not alone, and although my biological family turned out to be not what I had hoped for, life has given me a new one. People who value me for who I am, not for what I can give them. On my way back to Pulaski, I looked out the taxi window at the passing scenery and thought about how strange life is. Sometimes what seems like the end turns out to be the beginning. Sometimes loss turns into gain. And sometimes you have to let go of the past to make room for the future. I didn't know what lay ahead. Maybe new journeys, maybe new friends, maybe new passions. But I knew one thing for sure. Life is too short to waste on those who don't appreciate you. And sometimes the wisest choice is simply to let go.